Well, I was saying, someone clue me in on what we're waiting for.
No, yeah, I think we're just waiting. I think we're just getting situated. We're getting.
What?
I said the one AC, so I'm not going to
Okay, so maybe you're not ready.
Yeah, we're good.
The tracks are never gone, bestowed away with disembodied witnesses, and songs for dreams and delusions were called as endurance. A black girl's muse on the sky exchanged for tribute to the moon, a star, something brighter than our circumstance. If duty became participation, in our dance we figured out celebration, because who could mistake these tracks left behind in the wake? To be held and held in fascination and held in contempt. This is a story of repurposed pain to provide pleasure, circulated scenes of pleasure, a capacity to have and never to hold. What I discovered was that possessing a black body, which history and fiction coexist with performance. I performed parts in a series of vignettes to relate to you here, my dear audience. How can I turn this feeling that I become a blank space in which people project their fantasies into something concrete, and cause them to face the shame and my forever logs and scenes of perpetual battles won, battles lost, chained to you as new representation. Every pickaninny, mammy, Ole Miss, Huck Finn, Kunta Kinte, Lichbomb free issue. Exuding to thrill the horrid audience. My work mimics the past, but it's still present. Everything is now. Not a phase, but a continuous reflection of black being in the wake. This is not a story about repair, reunion, but of redress of the body.
The coerced capacity of black women to labor welcomes their pain. The distortion of presence as acceptance is necessary for the institution of whiteness. The misunderstanding of black participation within formal and informal routines is evidence of volition, will, and agency within the framework of slavery. Reinforced ideas that the institution was familial and pastoral, assuming the complicity of the enslaved. The plasticity of blackness operates within an economy of enjoyment, where the pleasure of white identification means coherence through black suffering. There is no white joy without black fear, terror, and pity, because whiteness needs unequal proximity to pain to generate infinite circulations of justified servitude. Hartman et al. 22. Reagan was not alone in his desire to slip into blackness that experienced first and last. Blackness, the patience of X and evil becomes the greater capacity to blackness, the fungible to the commodity directly in the immateriality of the commodity that uses circulation from one incarnation of value to another, extended the black body, enabling it to serve as a vehicle of white self-exploration, renunciation, and enjoyment. Enjoyment is unimaginable without recourse to the black body and subjection to the pleasure deal by this possession of myriad uses of flesh. This economy of pleasure and politics of enjoyment are executed in possession of the body. Attention is paid to the white specters, identification with characters of facility of blackness and the others. Self-fashioning in the role of pleasure carrying mechanisms of racial subjection, economy of enjoyment, the dynamic of possession and close scrutiny of the object of property and its uses after gesture of vulnerability to balance comes to the blackness below. Drama presented blackness as a vehicle for purchase and ascent and mental stimulus to the embodiment of unmentionable transcendental pleasure in both instances of fashioning of black stress, pity, and fear, desire, revulsion, terror, and pleasure. This ambivalent complex of feelings describes the spectacle.
This dichotomy is constantly evolving, from the dance to survive, never to live, justifying the auction block, the torment of staring down the barrel of a gun resolves with a certain pleasure of loving to kill your own, to the repeated offense of a black girl, having to be fast to obscure the pain and banish the empathy. These scenes are devoid of solutions. We couldn't have them. I'm not interested in sanctioning these scenes because I was not drawn to this young girl's image to enact more violence. I did not want to subject her in those ways. What happens when you look and listen to these and other black girls across time? What is made in our encounters with them? This makes ethical demands on the viewer demands to imagine otherwise, to reckon with invention.
There exists no desirability of an action for black people when no solution or resolve exists. The rhetorical backing behind achieving desirability must conjure black people as silhouettes to imitate communal expression and response. A cutout that exists at the margins, imagining the possibility of filling in the blanks rather than an intimacy with true demands and gestures that can never signify a liberatory relationship or expression of kinship. The resolution and its sympathizers are indebted to the staging of contrived, empathetic encounters that cannot take black people, their relationship to power and labor seriously. Evans 20. Rhetoric makes black people magical creatures who live in the land of the other, located of the margins. There is a permanent white audience and demand to write to the audience only. In this place can you find the subaltern, those at risk, imitation, African Americans, and monsters sent to disease. These monsters tend to grow, disgust, reach, fear, love less by being thought of, long for, called upon, or just. In proximity, the only way for the monsters to communicate is through empathetic encounters, through black gesture and black tonality, contrived empathetic encounters, the communication between the monsters and intimacy, structure all possible issues of information, symbols, meanings, that action for communities, so has already classified the range of recognition for humans and its monsters. Communication is only possible. Structural adjustments situated through the desires of humans executed to black life and other at the discretion of how the civil desires that every time of communication is to self-employed, socially and politically, the promise of liberatory relationships catharsis by staging an encounter that can be established into the things like the American family is this family when kinship comes at gunpoint. Black people spend their whole life trying to prove that they are the good enough contributing to the economy. They should try the buying and selling of black flesh, territory, black flesh from Africa is malleable matter. There is no longer a need for the extraction of blackness to require flesh itself. Civil society liquidates the blackness patterns movement within reason to progress time. Debate over bargaining rights like the plantation concerns itself with capacity and potential with maximizing what one can produce. The topic's inability to recognize the devastation done with the black body means unions again and again disavow and distance from the conditions of the pain body rather than address the one he sees called as one of redress, a remembering of the bodies before, a reckoning with the loss required to sustain structures of death. Is understanding that the call for a living wage is to wage war on the black body while consuming its pleasurable capacities. Hartman et al. 22. If redress cannot restore loss, then what possibilities does it provide? Redress is remembering the social body that occurs in the recognition and articulation of devastation. The violated body must be considered in relation to the dismembered body segmentation and organization for purposes of work enjoyment and punishment attended to the body as a site of pleasure, your sociality through alternative configurations of self-redress concerns the articulation needs and desires of the endeavor to meet them, the remembrance of recent history, the hurt, the high-end attention to the events that culminated in the crisis, making a vessel of communication activity initiates the necessity of redress and constantly repetition yielded by this flow of redress is an articulation of loss and a longing for remedy. The incompleteness of redress related to the magnitude of the breach. Redress factions without limiting or containing a breach. Redress as the limited characteristic quality of being betwixt and between. They express the tensions, limits, fissures, wounds, ravages, inevitably a part of the centuries-long history of slavery haunted by the threat, discovery, and reprisal. The resolution reinforces the binary problem and solution within the context of labor. Instead of sitting with the dead and dying, seeing them, knowing them, they forget, they deny, they move on. Instead, we redress and move for the pain body. We live, laugh, love in the wake. Sharp 16. What does it mean to defend the dead? The black dead and dying boys living in the push toward death, heart, emotional, physical, and intellectual tendencies. The way and needs of the living professional still lives with the concerns of each they deny access. Black people are forced to endure more pain than important. Workers sitting together as a way of marking memory and those among the living who mourn and celebrate their life. Black people still produce into and through the wakeness of non-existing. Students would say, well, they were given food and clothing, there was a kind of care there. What would the enslaved have done otherwise? The means of most of black subjection may have changed, but structure remained. Economy or silences, roaches, and time, space, and method as we do our work, absences, and archives to find the agents buried beneath the cumulative ratios and misnames our knowledge of slavery and black being is gained from studies, but also access to the sources of the kinds of knowledge from and of the everyday expected that is part of it and measure ways of knowing to enact efforts to make balance must become undisciplined, sitting with the gathering and attractive phenomenon that devastatingly affect black peoples in excess of the fictions of the archive. Vote affirmative for a politic of redress, a method of multiplicities that refashions and reconstitutes the social and discursive for the purposes of the pain body. It's more than overcoming, but a continuous process of enunciation that gives way to a pain body's release. Hartman et al. 22. Labor and pleasure was tentative, and ambivalence of pleasure explained by the body to ambitions, whims, fantasies, and the sleeves unmet yearnings lack insufficiently describes. Pleasure since the enslaved also lived for 7 night dances. Pleasure since stated weapon domination of possibility, nothing if not cunning, treacherous, dreaming for mastery, the promise of releasing the body and reducing the pain and captivity, starts wage in everyday life, providing conscious which power was challenged and claims in the name of pleasure, need, want, and desire, 7 night dances refashioned and used for their own ends by the enslaved one, acting furtively, secretly, and imperceptibly, and sees any number of opportunities to slip off the yoke, moving about where centrifuge does sub tyranny and politics to eliminate the challenges of domination launched with the rubric of pleasure, message, performance, and the constant everyday practice to consider the possibilities of practice in regard to domination. Second, defamiliar respond to the performance of blackness to make visible the challenges that emerge in this arena. Third, liberate the reformative form, the closures of sentiment and consensus rejection to engage in critical labor of redress, exploring the limits, creating transient of freedom tactics that compromise the everyday practices, refashioning of permitted pleasures and efforts to redress the conditions of the same was constant with other forms of everyday practices focused on the object side of depleted and ravaged bodies, severed affiliation, male alienation, and the assertion of denied needs to reanimate the dead to care for the exhausted and damaged. Call the names of those gone through a pit of reason that should have fought and study a way of thinking about the character of resistance, compass, and array of tactics such as work, slowdowns, fate, illness, unlicensed travel, destruction, of property theft, self-mutilation, dissimulation, physical competition with owners and overseers, the document that everyday resistance, slavery, and identify the constraints of every life and exploited openings. And the system what unites these types into the effort to redress the condition. They say these acts of redress are undertaken with the acknowledgement that the conditions will most likely remain the same. This acknowledgement implies neither resignation nor fatalism, but a recognition of the enormity of the breach introduced by slavery and the magnitude of domination. Redress the pain body encompasses operating in and against the demands of the system. Pain must be recognized in its historicity as the articulation of social condition, extreme need, constant violence, soul murder, and homelessness is the embodied experience of stolen life and social death, the violation and suffering intricately enmeshed with the pleasures which enjoyment of the same things to perceive recognition of community, permits and temporary uses of childhood, insensate and content, contradictions with the claim by pathology of the black body that serves just by acts of violence that exceed over distinguished pain is essential to making productive slave labor. Is the significance of the performance lies not to overcome or provide remedy, but in creating a context for the collective enunciation of the pain, need, and to politics and cultivating pleasure as a limited response to need and a desperately insufficient form of redress. I'm good.
Okay. My first question is the world always ontologically black or anti-black, more so?
I don't know what that means. Like the Hartman evidence has described conditions of anti-blackness, i.e. things like kinlessness that are produced as a result of anti-blackness. The app says that redress is necessary to understand this condition.
Okay, I understand what that means to understand. Is reprieve ever possible?
It's both
repair
understand
possible?
and it respond to. So the Hartman evidence at the bottom of the one you see gives several examples of what this looks like in the context of the everyday practices or tactics that the app thinks is good. But the app has made like a sequencing argument about an analytic of redress that is necessary to understand why those strategies can be generative in the first place.
So the strategies, can you detail what those strategies are, what they look like?
The Hartman evidence gives several examples, work slowdowns, feigned illness, unlicensed travel, etc. But in the context of the one you see, we will defend it as an analytic of those everyday practices that the app thinks are good.
Okay, so are you able to generate offense based on those material examples that you just listed?
As like analytic of politics, yes.
Okay, so what about slowdown, strikes, stops, things like anti-blackness, labor exploitation, etc.?
Well, our Hartman is using those things to describe an analytic of redress, and the context of redress is sitting with everyday practices.
So like I understand that part, but I think the issue is like you've listed like real forms of ontological material violence, and you've said that
people use examples to describe their analytics of like things like domination and response to those things. The Hartman evidence describes redress by using those examples.
Well, I understand why. So I understand why it's analytic to understand those things, but that's like terminally non-unique. I think
no, it's not. The app has said that that understanding or that analytic is always crowded out or traded off with because whiteness has to stage empathetic encounters that do not understand those conditions in the afterlife of slavery. That is what the app says.
So what about the ones these analytic changes white people's perception of how
I've explained this 3 times. Like the steps that are listed, the steps that are listed by Hartman, one of them is quite literally just like there has to be a process of acknowledging we're sitting in the afterlife of slavery to understand the violence that happens in the interim between like whiteness's assertion that slavery has like changed between slavery, Jim Crow,
so important note, right? The UN just announced that slavery is like recognized as a international crime against humanity.
This is actually so crazy. Like what they see is about a bunch of qualms about being behind the barrel of a gun or how black women's capacity for pleasure justifies pain, and then you're like, well, the UN is doing a bunch of stuff. That is our argument. Because you're over focused on solution building or well, there's other problems. Is it justification for the pain that happens?
So you said analytics are good. My argument is that the US just denied the analytics.
We have an analytic that describes how the things happen, but we also have a very political method about understanding violence and domination, which is what Amy is talking about.
I agree with that.
You cannot flatten it down to, well,
I'm not flattening anything, but I'm saying like you have said that, you know, like white people.
The UN said slavery is bad.
No, the UN said slavery is bad, and the US said no, it is not because it was not a legal crime. My question is, what about understanding the analytic of slavery gets people to do
to be the vessels to tell you why the
I'm not. I'm asking about solvency.
Then just engage. That's the whole point.
Okay, sure, that's fine.
Okay. I will send it. It will be 1 and then the case. Alright, let me know when y'all get it.
Wait, Flynn, can you hear me from there, okay? Okay, cool.
Yeah, I would have said something. Yeah.
I muted, so. I got this together. Okay.
Yeah, Diego. You give me some more.
You're fine, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Everybody got it? You want to see? Cool. Cancel.
Okay.
Flint, good. Okay. You're gonna hate me, Curtis, but I forgot the timer.
Lord. Okay.
I'll start in a couple seconds. Anti-blackness is a structure of political ontology that explains racialized labor and social alienation for communities. Blackness is the antithesis of human equality, and fight back to its violence and its paradoxical force and absence that gives coherence to the modern world of racial domination. Only are analyzing enslavement position the foundation of the NDT can render our demands more radical through called a John social extra-institutionality. Wedding 1026 would repeating racialized labor of American slavery since the 19th century. Racial labor, social alienation is an explanation for racial exclusion among youth. Political ontology consistent with psychoanalytic overchance of places indicated by due to funds bears market as a racialized alienation, social extra-institutionality. People may see an answer like ideology, thought relations, experience, and so severe automatic possibilities of antithesis in humanism and Marxism, psychoanalysis, management for human poses, and be the most refined and the emancipatory mediation, black people, such as allies, what is it? Lost in the epistemological movements of being anti-blackness, original antagonism, discourse, reference, history, slavery, and colonialism, and the African continent, diaspora, blackness, system, paradoxical force, and emphasis on cultural, ideological, epistemological, and even algorithmic levels of the foundation of the national order that occupies the position of the ontology of political vocabulary, imaginary, desires, implicitly, integration, but even what we imagine our influence are more radical, Afro-Muslim speculation about the blackness as a process, interest, spiritual domination, like a racism, or civil, within article to inquiry. The debate is structured by an arc of reduction built around the access of black subjugation. The one state's response to the resolution of question means the rhetorically critique modernity, prefigures the argumentative protocols that brought out grammar suffering that can speak to the lines that repetitiously destroys black being, no matter the content of the particular advocacy, is rhetorical form necessarily siphons energy into modalities. The humanists suggest that the parasitic of black suffering will descend. The 16th of heart of no post as the great power of all debate is always an arc of redemption of loser equilibrium to disequilibrium, redemption dogma, and the influence to be restored. Africanism does not offer redemption. It's particular rhetorical structure of those lands of reinterpretation. Any process of slavery to be outside of the realm. This is interpretation of the debate already ideologically Latin in order for black suffering to be part of the debate question. It would have to go through structural adjustment to begin to look like for some reason other group. You cannot tell a story now the story of before the invasion before the destruction. You have to think about representations, voter redemption, Afro-Pessimism, Semitic critique of the control of the appearance of relations are dependent on using black people as a parasitic host. And black affect is undershadowed by the disavowal black being the unthinkability of black feeling structure civil society itself and only your signifiers of mythology that recreate general sound of Palmer at 17 animals murdered 6 months. The massive teams are formed in her home with a second time run others who until there was a conscious by her actors as was telling the media that the judge characterized her wearing as emotional order schedule characterization of response was unacceptable accessible emotional response away from emotions or reduce hysterical anger and flatitude and offers those in the courtroom seem non-perturbed by Jones' testimonies on face and moves the lawyers and officers seem to be smiling, rolling their eyes and checking their phones. This clearly displays consider the opacity and thinkability of like a feeling structures of civil society representation like the response is only level is mythology for the redefined blackness is only humanity is sign of excess and lack and attempts to mobilize their affect only categorizes reactions as inappropriate and reifies blackness as gratuitous at turns states because their performance encapsulates blackness as non-human. Palmer 17 Joseph and Greek can only be perceived as rational black for excessive affect black reactions to gratuitous response are consistently characterized and inappropriate and themselves gratuitous and fundamental disconnect between the perception of black however emotionality irrationality and reality black being is operates within a low individual like you and the structures of feeling black affect is unthinkable within the closure of the man's esteem buried beneath overdetermined and discourse of reason performance of black affect is excessive inadequate or both black affect is unthinkable within the order of the humanism and menace of black structures of universality affect is a mode of relationality and affect theory is used to generate anti-black violence through blackness' inability to create coherent ontological capacity. The one fails to create more violence because of its embrace of affect, which is returned to a tool of racial violence through binaries, sensible and nonsensible, which has been racialized from the beginning. Palmer 17 affect can be delivered to those who see the affect of each usually the same, those who conceive of them as interchangeable. The erase mark that make a distinction between an emotion, as sounds inherited and the contain affect like beyond language, irritation, affect is universal humanism, a subject of body, the erasing affect, ontological bodily capacity, lies of epistemological contingency of capacity, affect reascribes on mind, body dualism, affect theory, as yet to substantially account for the problematic and blackness, affect is a description of the emerge of the reaction in the reaction of resource association ways that which affect serves as equitable to racial domination and anti-blackness. So wake work does not solve black suffering, but rather intensifies it. The bigger staff as a teaching. The sharp's wake work does not amend black suffering. It works to defend that is the wake work possible. We have two hands. What battle want to build? We battle. We resist. We build. We resist. The battlers need the builders sharper emphasis in intellectual work making. Anti-blackness. No focus to Achilles and racism as primary color resistance gives me a philosophy fair. Black studies who generally are preoccupation. We know how to battle or training progresses forward. We feel the pulse of black studies, but is that enough? I'm more compelled by the technical ability, raising the obligation of raising the we hold the competition to the primary or most effective resistance. If you're we resist class and require resistance requires and also a lot of versus taxes like the raising the in the case of the direct action ultimately not necessary is it sufficient and the engagement with wake work is a practice that remains with and trap within the weather anti-blackness chart event for 24 wake work and as a practice in the week of signifying services with refusal as agents who the examples can the weather event like refusal a sharp next original versus instruction of the gaze and imagination and sex teaching in the 2014 making Hutchins bringing her voice into focus of her former care and perform care counter to what is the care however black reduction also can only perform the wake work and already existing art material even if the function of black reduction is not merely entirely but trust is the one that is easily produced by the weeks of photography sharp is not wellness one whether repeats and repeats and repeats even if this is wake work so under this rotation and refuses to operate outside the economy that is subject to critique minimally at least replicates very order of balance and press against refuses for sharp as for harm and limitation must be embraced and they exemplify a relationship to the archive that acts of methodology redemption and transforms a colonial into inquisitiveness best 18 as all you productivity for those who draw the archive those who perceive it as conventions never that and apprehend its liveness eloquent read historiography has been short recovery scholars have to uncover the strength and discover hidden history revolutionary atlantic in the literature of the future every day and taking a recovery and reanimate lives this extends to harm and others never expect recovery imperative redispose us to read the archive and quantify the loss where imperative to give the voice to the voices and write the hidden history resistance by structures and presumption we can know in advance how the reward reduction of the dead equate the recovery of the past and recovery from recovery flows between the little ones as a reparation recuperation a repossession of obliteration nothing is hidden it doesn't mean everything is obvious we create ideas hidden is which is reckless while this may be true and the first experience hidden is forces and distinct situation relation to the colonial administration kind of historical transference consider who are you and that's like this always the black body is written on an ontological register and that necessitates fungibility which drains social life out of black people utilizing destructive force to release from excess that turns black people into objects that is varying them to the category of human win was 20 fungibility rates and ontological register nationality say that trade is a singular and a systemic reduction to humanize the commodities capital the trade created means no versus making a commodities mechanism that produces this application economic calculations like this cargo bodies on the same for attracted property capital the head is measurable units of cargo to economic machine risk perfect calculation bodies measured by fungibility to be fungible as after resistance content how another relationship with equity that requires moral substance of fungibility refers to those goods and products of the market are suitable for one another fungibility underscores monetary that also allows them to be fully suitable like this emerges out of economic ontology that trades in exchange of commodities living human bodies and quantities of commerce that enact ontological transformation alien transformation of life human bodies into like cargo fungibility applies blackness as a very real fungibility exercise ontological words wins extraordinary meaning and empowering global economies renders blackness exterior to the human black bodies and move transform cannot be remedied and improve the ontology of fungibility cannot be altered and must not therefore be no way give way to any kind of almighty rhetoric no matter how radical because the card of radical and negative to reject the one you see figure after pessimism permanent and 23 after pessimism has no blue recourse ontological antiblackness about this rich way to self even the most egalitarian spectator has something to gain from everyone is now black suffering and death black people experience objection over pride is eligible now let alone and conceivable after pessimism meta theory check upon degrees of self-representation such as mitigation and counter negotiation last opportunity one rises for no mark again was murdered left in the rules one able to grapple definition after symptomatic cultures finds left in the rules understand the social course considered acceptable no one having adequate practicing is killing the function of society itself and that as what would exchange on the solo action but on the levels of certain after pessimism would improve murder straight after pessimism for all no reactive attitude not to task change the world as confronting is a construction after pessimism for pursuing entirely different simple order that the condemn the co-signs of black people to save social death not black people to guarantee social life eradication of black suffering when mean the end of the world human who needs to be liberated in the world that is not the same as black people who needs to be liberated from the world of pessimism toxic global destruction Marxism affirming an entirely different orientation here are the workers of the world here's the slaves the difference of them must be reckoned with after pessimism allows the question of the world of oppressive groups that we will find their efforts to better inform through what that first emotion which carries the essential task of understanding and articulating black suffering now go to case redress 1 their harbored evidence says whiteness has an attachment of blackness that creates parasitic and humanistic affective relationship which means judges endorsing it as that solvency to idealism the method becomes an act of imagining work without providing textual explanations about self that impacts the impact of romanticization radical politics like locks into escapism and trades off with practice self-point A white people no slavery is real will continue to be anti-black you and cross example groups which means they can't justify their offense self-point B understanding violence it isn't understanding violence isn't a tangible departure from the status quo since people are doing it now this is offense violence are key for academic resistance they have cited affect politics alone makes politics indulgent rather regenerative and Carol 24 auxiliary dream possibilities churches across the criminal position never judge ways of being this ethos and makes sense but it seems to be the draw possibility creation as prediction and report your victory to get the ethics under responsibility of also imagining otherwise reduces hearing obstacles between critique and action making critique more those regenerative view and then after there was entrapment doing the promise of possibility cut the card at possibility now 5 empathetic identification this redress as a process if not just created inside singular debate rounds if it's an unconditional affirmation causes burnout because they have said whiteness cannot form blackness in any capacity under the topic now wake work the end of point of the scholarship just says we should engage in academic scholarship which takes out their ability then any external claims of solvency we've inserted 2 pieces of evidence in yellow and tactics fail to prevent the secrecy through the call for the valid zoom and more which means they can't solve slow down strikes fail because the state would just crack down on them because we all agree the state is anti-black and people whiteness would not understand or empathize with black people for process
Flynn, can you hear me if I'm over here? No.
Oh wait, actually, let me. So what I'll do is I'll mute my mic.
Mute your audio.
Yeah, mute my audio, and then you could put yours on. Which should work.
Is there an echo for you, Flynn, or no? Okay. Sorry, so what?
It's fine.
You're good.
Mhm.
Okay. You have a bunch of K's of black affect in the 1NC. What about the app as a performance or commitment to black affect as a strategy?
Yeah, your evidence has said there are lines in the 1AC that says that affect as a strategy can be something that is used for redress.
Where?
We have impacts from those things. So I'm pretty sure if we control the 1AC, it'll say
So
affect.
the Hartman evidence at the
Yes.
bottom says remembering the body before a reckoning with the loss as required.
Why is
to save
remembrance the
structure.
same thing as affect or requires performances
Because-
of blackness?
So your evidence in the line says redress concerns the articulation of needs and desires and the endeavor to meet them. A remembrance of breach, a history that hurts. Those things are all inherently affect.
Also,
I'm
the sharp
confused
evidence.
because like the Hartman evidence also says that the articulation of those needs and desires is inevitable. So what does your model or like the alternative say
well,
about how
You have
those
said
needs
that those things are
fulfilled?
inevitable, but you have also made a claim about the world being anti-black, and also we have as well,
Sure.
which means those
Well,
desires
that's not
won't
the
be met
question.
even.
Okay.
Like I guess
Yeah.
like the angle of the question is
Yeah.
just like you've read like theory of the things. What
Yeah.
does the alternative do to
Well,
fulfill black women's needs and desires?
Well,
Because those things are inevitable.
Yeah, so there's a couple claims to make. First, we'll say that voting affirmative does not fulfill the
That's not the
desires.
question. What do you
No,
do?
I think that it does answer your question because
It does not.
Yes, it
The
does.
app did something bad is not an answer to what do you
No,
do
it's not a
then
question
to
of if
resolve
the
that.
app will, or this answer particularly is not the app is something bad. Rather, the app has reinvested back into affective
That's
structures.
not an answer
that-
to the question.
no, I
Curtis.
think
What
it
does
is.
the alternative do for black femmes
Our argument
when
is
they
that-
have desires?
Our argument is that the 1AC,
Can
the
you answer the
alternative,
question?
yeah.
What does the alternative do for
I'm-
black femmes when they have desires or needs or wants, etc.?
We're getting there.
So
Yeah.
our alternative questions the reasons for why those things happen in the first place better than the affirmative.
You question the reason. What then?
Our argument is that there is
But
no
it's like-
then.
it's like the
there's
app
nothing
also-
about our argument is
Star
that
on your flow. They don't fulfill.
Well, first of all,
we
the
know
app
that
also
you
does
don't
question
the
things
app
as well.
remains
You
in
don't do
existing
this.
archives. What is the warrant?
it's
Yeah,
all
so
just- yeah.
okay, so the 1NT re-highlight of your sharp evidence says that the endpoint of your politics would say that we should engage in weight work. For example, we must become undisciplined, new modes and
That's not the
methods of
question.
researching. No, I'm
That's
answering.
not an answer to the
no, no,
question
no,
of
it
like
will answer
warrant
the
for why the app only sits with existing archives.
Okay, I'm getting it. We must become undisciplined, new modes and methods of research and teaching, new ways of entering and being in the
I'm not
archives of
talking about
slavery.
this card. You've read a different card that said.
No, that's why that card is a reason
Okay, your
why
warrant
that
is
is
the case
true.
card. I want to talk about like the rehighlighting then. The rehighlighting is just Hartman describing her own personal relationship to teaching. Why does that mean that that's the app strategy of redress?
Well, you have said that there are forms of strategy, like for example, it's like
Why
it
should,
cites
like-
examples of
Like
religion.
it's not
Why
just a
should the app
limit.
be beholden to like Hartman said a sentence that you all have
Well,
shared?
if you're not
the app
beholden-
and that therefore is the only
Our
context
argument
for
is
how
not
redress
Hartman
happens.
said a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
that Hartman conveys
If
those
Hartman
things
didn't
that's
say a bad
intrinsic
thing,
to
then
the
like why
affirmative
both
method.
negative? What is the trade-off argument?
I'm like, say Kathleen.
We become undisciplined. The work we do requires new modes and methods of research and teaching. Why is that a trade-off warrant for like the app can be generative of other solutions?
Well,
or, like,
because
insert whatever?
Our argument is that the way that Hartman has characterized the things are intrinsic to app solvency.
You don't
We
have
said
to
that
say
method is bad. It's not just the
Starting
example.
152. Oh, I'm sorry. What room is this?
123.
Okay, it's case and critique.
Are there cards though?
There are no.
Okay. You said case, okay? Okay. Okay, I think we're good.
When are you good?
Yeah, I just done that. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Black women's capacity for pain enables her pleasures in the economy of enjoyment that exploits scenes of black gesture and desire to signal an absence of pain. Dancing on the auction block that justifies slavery is our argument how pleasures yielded through the violent repair of pain. There are two impacts. One is empathetic encounters. Blackness is positioned as a blank space to project liberal kinships to state self-employing and promising blacks in a contrived encounter that avoids intimacy with an audience outside of the civil, which will always be us, which is our conceded Iggy evidence. It structures, exchanges information that calls niggas onto the stage to invoke empathy that lacks realize the intimacy of black life and loss, which means only we can resolve their affect offense. The impact is not just intimacies, which frames any risk of the alternative. The second impact is repair. Unions over focus on overt acts of pain to bargain around creates a paternalistic attachment to black femmes' relationship. What happens on the interim? I.e. our qualms and pain are justified through wage increases or pleasurable status of a protected worker to create dissonance with the tuning and reckoning with our needs once we're there. That's the Harvard evidence. The impact is flexibility, which outweighs and frames their offense because the risk of their offense has to binarize instances of pain and just and pleasure and affect as justification to not lead into the body is very fucking high. Rather than a repair of pleasure, prefer a redress of the body. Only a consciousness of redress avoids the binarization of pleasure and pain and instead operates against the economy of enjoyment. It is a constant conversation of plot that embodies impossible acts of interruptions and refusal to repair that refashions the empathetic encounter to an encounter with the monstrous intimacies that strive for communal understandings rather than a striving for increased pleasure or dissonance from it. The one who sees politic of limiting the response of pleasure creates a memory of pain that is necessary to dismantle speech's binarization of the two to justify our continued servitude and endless striving for their understanding of what it means to have affect or refusal. Your instruction is surrender to projecting your desire to script how black femmes should and should not labor is a constant negotiation that says we should meet black femmes where they are rather than criminalizing black femmes to where they weren't, which impact turns the whole fucking when you see cross legs. It gets at their offense only our reckoning of the outline of slavery and sitting with generations of capacity for black women to achieve strategies for themselves and gives instruction for what the panel does in the face of Long Beach's paternalistic attachments to solution building that absolves itself from engaging with the narrative of the Wednesday and fucking qualms of black communities because of their overfocus on the leak arguments for mind image that you lead into your proximity with hosts and the black femmes here who have to fill in the gaps where they refuse to theorize, i.e. Long Beach moves to not answer any of the narrative and the qualms of the one you see for Flynn and Daniel and music. You can never render or argue that are an RFT about endpoints or tactics or an ability to understand what certain link arguments are because you have to overcorrect your desire to create a paternalistic attachment to black women's ability to labor, which is our surrender argument. You should extend her between the two. Redress is the articulation of needs and the endeavor to meet them. The redress of the body, sitting, remembering, and between to the body is a necessary process and an affirmation to every fucking debate to lead into the giant potential of living between the binary and the job's uniqueness and why these balance should affirm and orient themselves toward equality and redress to the athlete of slavery. The surrender of blackness debate obviously solves some point one. It is very odd that they're flattened down Mike as a white judge, and it's reflected that their king has to use theory to flatten down the multiplicities of blackness justification for black women should not be able to make quantum debate. Rightness having a parasitic attachments is definitely inevitable. It's not a reason why the app is bad, but only we have an analytic. How do we deal with that? Through the interim, which is the surrender debate. There's no idealism. The one to see has made a paternalistic attachment to certain authors like Sharp and the one you see to erase the rest of them. The one you see is very clear that the method is a politic redress. This is their own argument about how the affective attachments that crowd out understandings view an example is not a reason why the one you see is bad. Our argument is that you should vote affirmative to redress their circulation that repair and orient towards the capacity for gender potential. The ballot argument is our changing and instead disentangle from the overfocus of how black women can produce solutions for you and instead what y'all can do for fucking black women. You can go to the critique. The opposite prerequisite to the alternative preferred analytic fungibility. The process of strategically giving and taking value away from black femmes to cultivate progress or understanding or refusal means that their analytics of labor will never be able to account for the social, emotional, reproductive labor that is extracted from the black body for their ability to refuse, the ability for black women to generate strategies that has overperformed and overfocused on the capacity for the alternative to sidestep the intermule of the black girls that get cold fast or being behind the barrel of the gun, i.e. the drops, analytics, and narrative of the one you see. The impact is racial gaslighting that will mutilate black women as vessels to signal the value of the alternative, but never the value in having genuine proximity or dialogue with the bitches who are actually here. The app outweighs the turns decay. The one you see is the impact turn to generating refusal strategies that have to cultivate encounters where you get to pick apart black women to devalue the ones that you come in proximity with. This is how extraction and abolitionist movements or refusal will always reproduce upon the black body because the use are instances of or whatever. Actually, perm do both perm do each invited the perm as an extension of the performance. It solves the offense. They conceded that our thesis that blackness exists in multiplicities and should not be constrained by communication and the competitive expectations. That's the icky argument about monstrous intimacies. It solves the best iterations of their offense, when negative is capable of solving their offense or ours. It links back to our offense about the ability to have community, i.e. answering of the one you sees in our palms and proximity to blackness. The one you sees analysis about the lived realities of black women and the absence of slavery is key to sustaining consensual gender capacities that affects are capable of attuning to the needs and desires of all. The black women in here, the next instance to pursuit of negation without genuine engagement with us or the other people, as demonstrates their method or avoiding net will never be for community and will always sacrifice someone that does not show up on their terms. The next step benefit is mutual locality. The alternative will always put actually, no, only the affirmative has the analytics to confront the pleasure and pain dichotomy that constitutes the ability to understand and affect in their link arguments. Black women's proximity to pain justifies distancing from black women's capacity for pleasure, which is emblematic in the one and sees move to just say we should refuse all instances of the gender capacity of the one and see because of their ability to interpret what Hartman is talking about. This is the double standard to set. The alternative to set a standard that is exhaustive by shifting the goalposts of what how we understand things like literature because they've over-spectacularized the existence of certain bodies or whiteness to be justification for why black femme strategy should not exist in the space in the first place. It exists in the first place. The first piece of Wilker's evidence links them to a double standard society. Beaches move to criminalize Kansas for literally being out is our argument that their ability to hide behind theory as justification to not give black women strategies to move throughout spaces means that their refusal will always produce misogyny, or it is a fracturing that benefits the permutation that resolves their arguments about siphoning energy. The one you see has responses to how black femmes exist within and outside of spaces, so there's a large risk the one you see has to criminalize niggas for doing that work, which is the uniqueness for the permutation. Debate being anti-black is not you winning 2-1. We are the only team that has described how we understand that interim process being surrender, which means there's a large risk that black people do not know what the fuck to do when they're in those spaces or in spaces like debate because they'll just say, well, you were too effective in the first place, which was our argument about how you always interpret black women in bad faith, so you're able to skirt them out or refuse them. The pattern of it is wrong. They do it too. The one, i.e. the one-state process is literally making appeal to the UN and slavery, which means that you have to perform the AFET, where you have to perform AFET for why the alternative is also desirable. Whatever instruction they give will require a level of AFET, which is our argument. They will shift the goalposts of what it means to do refusal or the alternative. They have literally described the alternative they have described the alternative as the articulation of black suffering, but then distance themselves from black women who might also do something similar. It proves that their policy cannot disentangle from the pleasure and pain dichotomy. The impact is bait and switching, which turns the alternative. That answers the next piece of evidence. The Palmer evidence of perm solves because they have said that blackness exists in multiplicities, that the alternative has to flatten down as purely affected to sidestep black femmes' demands. The Vicar 17 evidence is barely a link argument. We have been very clear that the method is a politic of redress, sharp giving examples of how wake work is an example of sitting with the body and how after the slavery is reproduced, and is not an answer to how the method of politic of redress because things are in conversation with one another, so their ability to compartmentalize them is our pleasure and pain dichotomy argument. This is our argument that they're over-focused on theory, crowds out nuances as justification to bracket out resistance strategies. This is your call to surrender from their cycles of gatekeeping that turns the capacity to refuse the alternative. Agent, can you give me that thing? That answers the Ventura 24 evidence. The best evidence there is no link. Best is talking about the re-bringing about of the black dead. We have not, was not something the YC has done. The YC is not an attempt to fill in the gaps of the archive missing from slavery, rather orient towards an understanding of how proximity to violence, that justify silencing black women. Our argument about the necessity of dismantling the pleasure and pain dichotomy process is emblematic that their enunciation of black suffering or their analytic of black suffering in the context of the alternative will always require people questioning the reason behind black women having desires as a justification to never fulfill the black femmes' needs, wants, and demands. You should have a high threshold for non-black femmes asserting themselves as arbiters of what black women need. The app results in a high risk that their models and strategies produce a distancing from the nuance of black femmes' needs by refusing an analytic of fucking gender and meets black femmes where they are, i.e. they result in criminalization and crowd out of bitches that inevitably have needs and wants and desires or communicate through fucking AFETs. Our demand is all three fucking ballots. You can understand it as a permutation of an affirmative argument that resolves the links because it fills in the gaps where CSU refuses to theorize without the risk of misogyny. Our argument is that all the things above, you You have not answered the interim process or like things or qualms that black women have in the narrative that want to see. Talk to niggas before the debate. If debate is so anti-black, whatever, why do you let black women go into the fire for you to generate tactics or understandings of affect? This is the thing about community that only the wanting see is able to resolve, i.e. the kinship arguments about redress that you should vote for.
You good? Alright. I want to start off with the pain and pleasure dichotomy. What is it?
Okay, the ONEC has said that whiteness, institutions, and certain traditional norms will use and overspecify black women's capacity for pleasure to justify pain. This is all the examples of the ONEC about, well, niggas were dancing on the auction block, so obviously that means slavery is okay. Or when black intercommunal violence happens, it's justified by being like, well, you know, black people love to shoot each other. This is our argument about how there is a cycle of pleasure and pain dichotomy that justifies black people being like, well, you shouldn't have to do anything, or that your strategies are not important in certain spaces. We think that the K is an example of that, which is like the entire
Why does the whole strategies are not important thing link back to the dichotomy? I understand like the
I'm very confused. Did you not say that the role of the whole panel is to refuse the capacity for black women to generate solutions? The alt was refusal. Then you were like, affect is bad, but also we need to have an understanding of black communication. Like, this is our argument about how you will shift the goalposts of how black women should meet and dialogue with you, because it used that dichotomy of like this thing and that thing, which is never like
why does the
reciprocal.
why does the 2AC not also shift the goalposts by making framing arguments for the ways that the judges should evaluate the round?
Because they're consistent. Yours are inconsistent and not reciprocal. I.e., you get to be like, well, your affect is bad, but then when you see crosses is like, well, I'm going to appeal to the judge and be like, well, the union and UN and slavery, whatever, as justification to like not care about black women's demands. Or you're not going to explain, like, what are you talking about? Niggas aren't effective. Like, this is just like actually like not realistic and very unserious.
Okay.
I don't think.
Okay. I think the surrender argument can use surrender to blackness and still vote negative.
What?
Yeah.
We have not said, like, we think the panel should vote affirmative for a policy group redress. We have not said vote affirmative for surrender. We think surrender is an impact framing argument to understand offense.
The 2AC says surrender, so I'm just trying to clarify it, like.
I've answered this question.
Okay.
We have said that they should vote for a policy group redress. We think surrendering to blackness is an analytic to understand or avoids how whiteness will be justified
Why?
to not answer or meet black women where they are.
Okay.
Your arguments about capacity.
Okay, a lot of your offense or arguments for solvency relies on shifting our understanding of study within labor, but also like the
No, it
topic in
doesn't.
debate.
We have literally said that voting affirmative, like we have made an argument about ballots, not about like the panel being like, I believe everything that Brooklyn says.
What?
Or whatever.
Okay, yeah.
You don't have to change the way the community works. This is a Hartman 22 evidence. She is talking about the need to constantly redress and understand. We think that the ballots is a continuation and the possibility for that to happen in the future. Voting negative triggers our offense immediately. Voting affirmative resolves it. Ballots are good. Give me all three of them. That's the permutation.
Okay, so why do ballots change norms if you have already made the
This is our
assumption
fucking
that
thing, is that you will always disavow black women's capacity to like generate solutions because it's like, well, you don't change everything. That's our arguments about the interim.
it's not about changing everything?
You just said that I don't change all the norms in debate. That's the reason why.
That's not true.
That's what you just said.
It's about burdens because you've made an argument about
That's
why
not
the
a question.
world is structured by whiteness. So I'm asking, what does the 1AC do to resolve those things?
No prep. I'm sending a couple parts. It's just a critique. Was this from 5? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Flynn. I'm sending cards right now. Did you say something?
I was just asking if there were cards.
Yeah, sorry. I'm putting it together right now. You said round 5. It's recent. I know. Yeah. Oh, this one y'all's phone.
Why would I put that over there?
I know it was on the thing. I thought it was Daniel's. I was like, this is not Daniel's phone.
No, I don't have an iPhone, but
Let me put my AirPods in.
I'm good whenever.
Give me a second. Okay. HP. Y'all said y'all were good, right?
It's just okay.
Flynn, you said you're good. Daniel. Okay. Let's try it for a second. Anti-blackness is an ontological form of violence that reproduces the category of social death, barring black body from the category of human while simultaneously experiencing social death. This results in endless death for the black body, both physically, socially, and metaphysically framed. Social death through three pillars that should impact current frames of black feminism. One, gratuitous violence. Blackness experiences non-sensible violence that rationally has no value, makes no sense, i.e. the U.S. and others paying millions of dollars to capture African slaves instead of taking peasants from their homeland, making infinitely worse economic sense. Breonna Taylor being killed while sleeping by multiple police officers are all more proof that black experiences finds on a plane that no other identity does. We prove that our impact must come first. Secondly, alienation. Blackness is borrowed from cultural and kinship structures which should impact every tweet link turned about social life within social death or resistance strategies, i.e. nothing that blackness has can be traced back to Africa to create the capacity for social life and social death to resolve the lines that gratuity puts onto them, which prove that recuperation of the past and present and future is impossible for blackness, greed, gender, dishonor. There's no honor in being enslaved. Black people face humiliation, racial stereotypes, stigma, etc. that are always the butt of civil society joke, which is nothing about the affirmative renunciation of redress and solve to prove that emancipation through redress from ontological structures is impossible, since being black means you're non-human for whiteness and you're part of seeing yourself as human. That's what they did. They say the app is a prerequisite. It is terminally non-unique. Everything the one you see is described as already happening in the status quo. If it is a claim about debate, functionally conceded, one NC, Wilderson 16, definitely prove that nothing about talking these things into the structure debate solved, rather siphons black energy back into the institutional structures that cause it to mind. Prove that you know nothing about building affirmative is part of your status quo, because everything they described in the one they see is either already being academically written about or already being enacted in status quo. But you know that anti-blackness is still an all-time high now. You should hold the line for new winner articulation, because you know the after functionally the status quo is not depart from it. But the next argument is that we don't understand black labor or black women's strategies. Obviously, will be answered by Card later. They say we sidestep black girls who are called fast. Douglas Evans, we definitely prove that we saw their impact. The racial gaslighting impact is nothing. We have definitely had dialogue with the app. You presented a strategy, and we have tested that strategy to multiple cards about your methodology of weight work, affect performance, etc. Which proves we definitely are not racially gaslighting you, but assuming that we have not engaged in the app we does is a reverse form of racial gaslighting by saying we never engaged with the app we clearly did, which is a reason why you should reject our offense and prove it turns the case. They say refusal strategies are good. They say abolitionist movement reproduce violence. One, we're not an abolitionist movement, but secondly, we're definitely winning that nothing about the one C strategy solid. We should trigger our presumption. They say negative negation, not engagement is bad. We definitely do engage, and we think that this sort of our argumentation line is definitely good to create after-pressure strategies. But our argument is not nothing about building affirmative builds community, and we will sacrifice anyone because we're testing your method. They say only the app understands pleasure and pain. We'll do it later. They say we have a double standard. Then we've not over to conceptualize certain bodies. Rather, we've made an argument for why ontology overcodes the ability to access forms of gratuitous freedom that they've accessed. We've not criminalized Kansas for anything. We've not hiding theory, and we've descended that nothing about building affirmative good black women strategies. We do not reproduce Muslim War, but thinking that building for them in this race to solve Muslim War is definitely more clearly optimistic than the inverse, which proves they cause a spiritual murder impact. But later they say the way you response to how black femmes exist, we criminalize them. Obviously not true, because we're testing your theory. They say that we only understand anti-blackness, you should surrender, and we do not interpret black women in bad faith. We've against your strategy, not your personal identity. You prove that nothing about really negative says that Kansas was bad people. They say that we make appeals to you and slavery. This is just not true. We use it as an example that proves that you should go negative on presumption, i.e. the one you see crossing is very clear on we should interpret different forms of labor that's been extrapolate in order to understand the violence that's happened. Our argument is that nothing about people interpreting that violence as real solved in your office, because we're constructively winning that there are examples that prove that the UN and people can acknowledge that slavery was bad, but still not adhere to it because they have a gratuitous and psychological grind through the bill drive in order to counter blackness and human debate in which society did not have a warrant. If it comes up in the 1 yard, I can do the answers, but it's probably solved by our negation office because it proves that we have a reason why we are good. They say we let black femmes go into the fire by not telling them the debate was anti-black. I don't know what this argument gets them. They read a bunch of cards that says that collective bargaining over the topic is anti-black. It proves this is just premeditated murder. You should reject the team form. It proves that they have criminalized us for doing something that we did not do, but proves that they have imposed an imposition on us that they definitely knew from the burden of the jump. It proves that they were criminalizing it. They say we not explain gender. Our theory explains their offense. Only alternative solved by itself that does this. 25. Most theories the lack of rigor to grapple with the same as the demons and gender, the micro sex, sexuality, street, or social theory, race, slavery, reduced relationship, utility of sex, violence, fortune, mother, humanist, enslavement, and sexualization, civil centers, blackness, on the outside, other sexual humanity, tyranny, black countries, so captains, really, to save, passive violations, obligations, violence, violence, recognize sexual originally, have to come, understand the really with second way to the mystery, but imbalances your opposite, not have the agency, the sexual violation, not registered, crime to entry, the sexual illuminated, impact, and like the same as suspended, but the techno, during those sexual bodies in the sound, so the opposite of the obsolete, and nothing can be sex life, violated, past, structural, reparative, and fantasy desire. Put the card at desire. Okay, the next argument will be framework. Our interpretation that this debate is a debate about competing theoretical lexicons to understand anti-blackness between that benefit. Arc of redemption, sad, functionally, have dropped votes to 16. Debate is built upon the arc of redemption that photos in every debate, especially this debate, must interrogate black suffering since it's substance noisy scholarship. Photos in that in order for black to be a part of the debate question, we have to go through a structural adjustment to understand what suffering looks like, and Afro-pessimism is a better way to interpret their violence because it proves that their strategy relies on you, relies on you as judges using black people as the parasitic host. They drop the world dependent on anti-blackness, and without the model world cannot exist. They say we demand the ballot. Ballots do not change in the blackness debate. You should frame this here. They may allow for more debaters of color debate on their team and make them feel happy in this moment. But our argument is that the people in power are still making debate anti-black, and the one you see just enables ballots to be able to co-opt affirmatives to celebrate institutions built upon slavery, which revives anti-black power structure. Believing that that's a good method distracts you from the idea that debate isn't inherently anti-black debate. That means the question of this debate is not if the ballot can solve their harm or make them happy, rather should be used to say fuck the university and the world and refuse their faith. The role of judge reject what you see. You will want to try and vote after try die. Remember their evidence. We see the after is inherently non-unique and the cannot solve their violence. Them saying that they want the ballot is the example of how they can just reinvest back into institutional legitimacy and recognition politics that are always built upon anti-black violence. You should not just give them the ballot because they requested, because this is an example of cruel optimism, i.e. them saying give me the ballot on a 3-0 does not remove the power structure that still cause anti-black debate to happen. We're winning a huge risk of a terminal cruel optimism impact that A, legitimizes the university, and B, causes the spiritual turmoil of black people to resolve to black. We say our call for the ballot links back to blackness. Obviously not true. We've not called for the ballot to receive legitimacy. Rather say that the after the bad method. They say we can never understand your link. We're not paternalism. We've never said that you should do X, Y, or Z. Rather, we have a reason for why your model, your app is bad, and we are really links to your method to prove that they cannot redress the black body because we're just winning arguments that said you should not defer to them or surrender to blackness because we've not flat down Mike as a white judge or anything like that. We have said that the YC has engaged in parasitic structures and you should reject your attempts to them. Okay, I'm going to go for the best and first extended. The YC's attempt to recreate archival resistance in debate is an example of creating a relationship that recreate the methodology of redemption and colonial inquisitiveness. Our best evidence is that the presumption that we can know what the redemption of the dead is the example that outweighs the terms case. It's an example where the activists can profit off of institutional rummaging, where black activists can take reward from discussing dead icons to the value of academic sense, creating a parasitic relation for those who not defend themselves, especially since death does not authorize people to defend them. And that's one of the YC's performance protects their dead, proved by the archival resistance within their projection of between divine only recreate archival rummaging that legitimize their agency. You say the YC is not filled in the gap, but YC tech reset a remembering of the body before, a reckoning with loss, structure with death, a call for a living wage. This is our argument that enables them to consume the suffering of people who are lost in their own narratives, which proves they definitely have filled in the gap in their analytic of black suffering cannot solve. We definitely don't criminalize black people for affect, that'll be later. Okay, the next thing is the bigger stuff link the YC performance of wake, work, live, laugh, and love and wake. It's an academic project that reproduces the cruel optimism and anti-black nostalgia of better times in archive, but distorts the fact that everyday resistance trades off with creating tactics to end the world, since anti-distance, wake work, prioritizes intellectual work, which diminishes black art thought by keeping it inside the confines of books, speeches, performance, etc., which only justifies pain and violence to be used business, use of politics, which enable academics to romanticize everyday resistance that also categorize black people as commodities. The example of the UN and YC crossing is very important. Their explanation of crossings is that the area linked to slavery and violence is key to get people to understand the gratuity of slavery. This is our argument. The UN just announced that slavery was a crime against humanity, and the US still refused to acknowledge it as a crime because they thought it was legal. It proves that there are offenses to solve because telling people slavery is bad does not change the gratuity of anti-blackness. Assuming it does create core optimism that causes spirit murder. This problem is that the part of the acts that is totally not unique. They're still by either A, people know slavery was bad and black labor was stolen would be what they go on presumption because they cannot solve their offense, or B, they try to convince people that slavery is bad, which links to the African printed above. Everyday resistance is futile. You may feel good to say that we should affirm acts of black resistance, but if we win it's not unique and our acts not solve it, then that's all. I mean, what happens when you go down to slow down the strike and you get fired upon being productive enough and you leave your house, your home, your family, etc.? What happens when you go to the center of your party, your white supremacists go and shield the party because someone posted it on social media? This is our argument for why everyday acts of resistance trade off. We're ending the world, so they say whether to every form of acts of resistance that you sometimes use to trap black people and say proximity violence. It's not, we're not crowd out surrender strategies. Rather, if we win that their strategy is not unique and not working down, it proves that they either reinvest back in an academy that is parasitic on your debt, or we're just winning that the after truly non unique, they should, but they're going to presumption. Then you're going to have a right to lead, so read, so clear your winning on right now. The bill economy is an impact backfire. It also proves there's no pain pledge economy that's secure all level. Politicians making more people benefit from potential black people care, and then legal routine, the air evidence, and all black people hate black people do accommodate. So the political economy is saving the boy, the bill economy working anytime. Another proportion is cross accumulated who's fine, who's had personal finance, skinny, little, fear black people drops the bill economy, confident, not the power to create. The 60 and the 2 kind of identical way to be associated by black people who have seen 100 more dead.
Wait, are you good?
Let me take out my
Or
AirPods so Flynn can hear me. Okay, I'm good now.
Flynn, can you hear me?
Do you have your like mic on but audio off? Try that. That should work.
Like unmute.
Yeah, like unmute but turn your audio off, like your computer sound off. It should work.
Can you hear me now?
Wait, Flynn, can you hear? Brooklyn?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, they can hear you. They can hear you. Okay.
Okay, are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, the alternative says it's an articulation of black suffering of the world itself. How does that avoid your arguments about APEX?
Because we haven't communicated the idea of a politics of redress. We think that's a distinction
So
between
you think
the act and
only
the
redress is APEX?
No, not only. It's
How
not.
do black people communicate suffering and violence on their bodies?
Well, our argument is that trying to communicate that violence, not through a lens of gratuitous violence, is futile. Our argument is that the
You
alternative is
think
not
that the
evolved.
1AC hasn't articulated gratuitous violence? That's your argument?
Well, we think your solution to that is futile and reinvest back in the anti-black
Okay,
structure.
you've made arguments for why the archive consumes like black
Correct.
push and black suffering.
Correct.
Why did you then move to bring about like Breonna Taylor and all of your evidence about like the harm of like black bodies? So
Because we haven't-
will believe
yeah.
the effect of the
Yeah, because
gratuitous
we've
violence.
used those examples as reasons for why gratuitous violence.
So like
is
using examples or like
Yeah.
like those things is okay if it's an example of your stuff.
Well,
I'm
that's not
confused.
that's not the only reason. Like
Then
you've
what's
made
the other
so
reason?
you
This
have made
seems like a
claims.
bunch of
Yeah,
dumb shit.
sure. So the last part of Lancey is very clear on the ways in which we should use sort of historical figures and do wake work to engage in like an archival
What's the
understanding.
difference between using historical figures and like having an understanding of people living in the afterlife of slavery?
Because our argument
Like why is that not
yeah,
reanimating the dead? You literally did it at the top of the Twin Sea being
Our
like
argument-
Breonna
yeah,
Taylor.
it's about endpoints, right? We think
It's
that the
about
yes,
endpoints?
correct.
Why?
Yes. Because we
You
have
just
made,
said that it doesn't matter. Like black people should not be looking for tactics because
Yes.
the world will always be anti-black. So
Agreed.
what is the endpoint then?
our argument is that nothing about voting in this space an endpoint. We don't think your resist strategy you presented
Do
are
you
either
think you
unique.
make an endpoint?
I'm sorry?
Do you think you make an endpoint?
No, that's not critique. The idea you can ask that question is our criticism because nothing about voting affirmative creates those things, and all your strategies are
You
inherently not
literally
unique.
said that the when he says that solutions are bad and over focused on
That is just not
that
the
is very
truth.
that is very
You've
clear.
made arguments in which you cross you said we create survival strategies. That's what you said.
No, we said interim stuff. We said
You said
interim
no.
is
I
dead.
think we were very clear. You
I
were very
think you know
clear.
what's going on. Okay,
You
said
listed
that.
multiple examples of strategies. You said the
Chris,
strategies do not work. They're futile. We've said that multiple times.
I know
and
you
that was
said
process.
futile, but this is wrong.
That was process.
Why is voting negative on like fuck the university and having a better orientation towards Afro-pessimism different from like you've said that it's bad for the panel to be like, well, voting after results misogynoir, then you then said that they need to like
Wait,
vote negative to like fuck the university
Wait,
and say that those
Can you
things
repeat
are
the
bad.
first part of the question?
You have said that voting affirmative to resolve misogynoir is bad. Then you have also said that the panel should vote negative to resolve like one violence, but also just like orient towards Afro-pessimism.
We have never said that voting negative solves violence. We've
Yes,
never
you
said
did. You were like, it has a better understanding, like all these like.
okay,
positive
better
things.
understanding and solving lines are two totally different things. And that is our reason why we do permutations.
So
You
your
said strategy, we've said analysis. Those
your
things are
link
two
arguments
pieces.
is affect solution seeking is bad in the archive.
We said that your
Where?
performance of affect is bad. You have read evidence that says that communicating black suffering through a pain, pleasure dichotomy is a good
You
thing.
communicated
We've
all that
impacted
suffering at the
that.
top of the Twin Sea. What are we talking
Well,
about?
no, we think
You're
there's a
saying
no,
nothing.
no. There's a very clear distinction here.
You're saying nothing to me.
I disagree with
I
that.
don't care.
That's fine.
I will be just sending out one card.
Wait, what's happening right now?
I'm just sending out a card.
Actually, we take a second. That's right now. No, just make it quick. Yeah. Okay. 9:38. Okay. Yeah. Just start here. It's gonna start off with a 2 NC left off. And then
Why should we do the card? I just want the
okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Alright, 9:13. Just finish this block and then I'll take one.
Is it like just okay or?
It's a K and case. Daniel's just like finishing a link today and then doing like perm stuff. Okay. Okay.
He said that I was just reading it.
Oh yeah.
Wait, hold on. My thing is being weird.
You know there's nothing. There's nothing in that cup.
Okay, it feels like a little bit left. Man, with this turbine, I need as much caffeine as I can get.
Just as much as saliva on.
Okay, Flynn's good. Oh, Brooklyn, could you mute real quick just because I
I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, you're good, no worries. Cool. We're all good? Cool.
Redress is a humanist understanding of meaning, desires, or performance of pain, narratives, and expression of black enunciation is extension of affect consumed through anti-black libidinal drives. Our power evidence is amazing. They say that black people, especially in politics, are redress as the example of libidinal economy, and where not black people interpret Kansas performance as irrational, proven by you having to probably get the RFE exaggerated more, which are all used to deny black humanity. Affirm whiteness. Plumber evidence gives examples of Jones' grief can only be perceived as irrational black anger and excessive affect. Black reactions to gratuitous violence are consistently characterized as inappropriate, exorbitant on themselves. Gratuitous is a fundamental disconnect between perception of black hyper-emotionality and irrationality and the reality of black feeling that operates both on the level of individual black people and the structures of feeling that impact towards the one he sees method to prove that the one he sees empathetic identification uses emotion and affect of feeling black labor in order to intensify anti-blackness. So they say when we flatten black women as reactive, we're not flattening black women as reactive because again it is not a question of individuals but necessarily a critique of their method, because we have said that the ontological conditions will inevitably make black people as non-human, which are conceded warrants coming out of the 2AC. Okay, go to the permutation. No perms in the methods. If you methods debate one revolutionary testing, it's key to create the best clash of resistance of perm, denies us having robust conversations which jettison theoretical nuance theory and severance. It still links or severance all specific legal arguments or just as the perm proves that they can jettison their methodology because we are impact turning it. It makes being neg impossible. Then it proves a mutual exclusivity. Avcondo the key generates competition by being anti-theoretical to the 1AC. The permutation justifies Avcondo by allowing the 2AC to obliterate the link debate justifying infinite spikes on a crucial neg offense proven by how we literally have no link to the method because they have not specified any single example per their evidence. Now the critical impact terms are good. No perms incentivizes critical impact terms, i.e. abolition good versus bad, hope good versus hope bad, etc. The 1AC and the 1AR will see that those debates are violent, which is false. Impact terms are the crux of good KPK debates. That benefit is nuance debate, which is the internal link to the which is the internal link that turns to our offense. Now perm scribing their model debate incentivizes perm scribing proven by the 2AC and 2AC that's bad because the 2AC has to beat them back on explanations with nuance argumentation, which was the block behind it. The 2 and are infinitely behind it. Infinite perm solves their offense, which means they don't need a permutation. And KP the permutation does not solve. They need to answer every disad we have on the permutation. Every standard is a reason to reject the permutation. Now substance all links are just as liquidation. Disad turns are evidence perming is the example of pacification in humanist grammars that tries to mold the words after pessimism with atheist performance that allows them to assimilate blackness into whatever they want to, which turns their offense to some point A. They consider H. They are held accountable for their politics since they correct arguments together, and their theory says that whiteness always shares a parasitic relationship to the what they can't say culpability, decide, or victim living since it's a critique of their method based on what Hartman says. Whiteness, i.e., whiteness requires a connection of blackness that will always cause violence through the pain of pleasure dichotomy, which means AJ and they're refusing AJ's involvement. And the oldest good to refuse white joy that requires black death and violence. 3. Humanism decide a redress can only invest back in humanism that trades off with Afro-pessimism because it seeks a redress from systems that we know will never again reject the blackness, which only recreate cycles of cruel optimism, resentment, and violence and burnout and lash out, which turns case and is an independent reason why they can't solve their impact. So vote negative presumption and the permanent is human parasitism. Grants 2018, the underlying drives that position not people who call it like African Americans being no order around peace, parasitic relation, animated slavery, not going after every converse, also more here, imperial system, discourse, rely heavily upon the operators of more parasitic assumption of people who victims themselves in new abolitions, victims, though they show me political black states, whatever, not black people, assign a cult card, not black people assign. And now, clear a bit of a cross-sex argument is that seeking redress from the system is futile because it can never recognize blackness as human, which is conceded coming out of this 2AC, who conceded those ontology words. It takes out the app and clears up our reasons of why affect that can never seek to redress violence for black femmes. They said reading theory is violent and probably spamming theory or whatever the argument was. Reading theory is good, it provides better models to create the best forms of engagement, which answers our arguments about not us engaging them in good faith or black femmes. And negation is inevitable, ruined by Kansas must be next to, which means they commit the same violence they critique at some point, which double turns their offense. Losses are inevitable, treating them as a violent for black women is terrible since it assumes wins get the job done to check anti-blackness, which is a form of redress that is terrible since individual rounds don't solve their impact. Some point A, it's not about you solving all violence and burdens. I use that whiteness is terrible, anti-blackness exists against black women. Those are tangible impacts that require tangible solutions. It's not a yardstick to decide how they out to debate, but a critique of the one he's meant that not individuals. Per ontology, perm do both. They separate themselves above do each. That proves that this is performative contradiction is the reason to reject the team, i.e. they distance themselves from other black people as well, which causes them to be a sacrifice black people as well, which the double turns all the offensive 2AC went forward. Now they said perm vote after filling the gaps. They don't fill in the gaps, and I've already answered this above. The theorizing gender stuff is not a net benefit to them because Curtis already did it in the 2AC. Now go to case inherency tree a presumption as offense because they have not met their burden of proof. The inherency is a stock issue. They have said solvency, i.e. bringing new redress and new ways to study, but those are reasons why the status quo is good, not the 1AC. No less in the reading of the 1AC, since we all know that the world is structured by anti-blackness or whiteness, which means that it answers all their debating good offense too. Anything else external is answered by presumption, since those things are done by the status quo absent a ballot, and all reasons why Kansas does not need it. But the other thing too is that they have not explained anything external, so you shouldn't let the 1 year grants that about us needing to provide a solution for black femmes. Since the 1AC does not clearly do that. Now they said affect is inevitable. There are a few implications. One, it proves that they gotta solve their offense. Bruce, you should go negative on presumption because if affect is inevitable means you cannot Jedi mind trick anti-blackness or white people from changing how affect is created, which means they reinvest back into affect the structures that cause consumption about anti-black violence. True proves that voting affect creates anti-black affect or judges consume their engagement with wake work strategies and pain and pleasure, which proves that their offense is snake eating its own tail, i.e. the ways in which they tell you, Flynn and Daniel to evaluate arguments means that you inevitably have the middle drive that proves it, and it proves we do not criminalize black women for affect, but it's proof that we have made a solvency deficit for why the app cannot solve offense. Okay, surrender, it's 0. Reject this framing. 1, more surrender and vote negative for Afro-pessimism. Anything else is paternalistic and sacrifices black debaters. 2, doesn't solve since you go for AJ2. 3, rejected since it excludes Curtis, which is anti-black. I already did this above, and it's not about individuals competing methods, so you should devolve to that instead. 4, refuse to call for deferral politics, is homogenizing, racist, and universalizing, which excludes other black women who have never had the chance to debate Kansas or be in this room, which turns their offense. It means they can't solve any of their offense, i.e. you should vote for the app because it's good for all black women. It's a universalist and essentialist narrative that doesn't assume, which was already explained above, and now they said not listen to, and they said that us being negative proves offense for them. It is not offense, since we refuse their politics and they have to contest their ontological claims. Individualism also turns their offense, i.e. goes via voting for Kansas HB in this round, just by literally sacrificing the black people who have to endure the violence of affect. Now the empathetic identification stuff, I already did this above with the judge stuff. They said we shift the goalpost, but we don't. They said criminalizing for being affect. We said we criminalize them. No, I already answered this. They said we've let in judges white. I already answered this. They said reject repair. We're not repair. Most of the tactic stuff is just assuming we read the cap K, which we did not, because we are critiquing your stuff from an ontological stance, which you have not reckoned with, which means that you can vote negative presumption. The 1A doesn't get new answers.
718.
It's 7:52.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the case?
I am now, and I'm recording.
Okay, everyone's good.
Yeah, we're good.
Black women's capacity for pain enables your pleasurable act of redress. It's a process of leaning into a black intimacy is necessary to avoid whiteness's attachment to repair. As a justification of stage empathetic encounters that fundamentalize black pleasure and pain as preconditions to questions of strategy or interrogation of anti-blackness, you should lean in to malicious intimacies as a filter for impact and solvency. The opposite not sit with pleasure and do nothing else. Rather, that we have a uniqueness argument that says that Squirrel constantly assesses what black femmes need because whiteness assumes black femmes need to perform pleasure or whiteness's need for their pain. Readers as well as a very high risk they criminalize black femmes' strategies and suffering because it says that we need to sit with and tune to the material conditions of the afterlife of slavery, but then become generative of black femme resistance and favorability of the risk of reproducing an anti-blackness means that them winning that interrogation is good is insufficient because we have a uniqueness argument about the necessity of meeting black femmes where they are, i.e. some black femmes need that level of generativity to avoid the inevitability of black femme affect, which means the only negative outcome can criminalize black femmes to the app meet them where they're at. This is an impact turn to their link framing and your call to surrender to blackness is a refusal to crowd out where black femmes are, i.e. refusal to strip what black femmes need in the face of questions of non-communication. This turns their overarching argument about the futility of the app. Inherency is a Stalker choose to vote negative is our argument that they weaponize appeals to debate to disavow black femmes in the room, which means that they create their own arc of redemption argument. You can understand their case debating as a performance of the things that the athletes critique. It solves their argument about engagement, though, because there is only a risk that everyone is parasitic, but only the opposite and analytic about ongoing conversation, i.e. Hartman's argument that redress is a process and not a one-size-fits-all solution, which means that permutation do each definitely solves, and there is no risk of trade-off for any of their competition arguments because we have impact on both of them, and they have not won a warrant for why criminalizing black femmes at the expense of that model is good. It means they do not have individualism offense, or you sacrifice all of these other black people because the app is generative of a communal framework, and we have won that they're leveraging a black femmes outside of the room. It's the reason why shit is never done in the interim, which is the actual uniqueness argument for why sitting in redress is good, i.e. the afterlife of slavery, and why those conversations are crowded out in the status quo. They say the surrender offense. No, it is not about individual black men or surrender to Brooklyn, but an argument about impacts and solvency, which is explained about your appeal to be like fuck white people as the same performance of audiences arguments that Hartman has critiqued in the 1AC, which is the case explanation above. It is the impact turned by all of the monstrous intimacy stuff that is extended on case, which proves that we get permutations because you just being like you have homogenized people is our entire argument that you have to stage pain of people outside of the room in order to negate the pleasure of black femmes in this space. Now I will go to the K proper here, the ontology debate. We have impact turned. We just call for black women to be culpable for the world as anti-blackness. That's the reason why black women shouldn't be offered opportunities to address the body is our argument about exhaustion. Our analytic of fungibility is conceded. Their politics co-opt black femmes' potential because the world is anti-black but never answers how do we orient or care for black femmes when we come in proximity to them and when they do not have the same desire of ending the world on the same terms as them. It means that Beach is right about the structure because it always justifies racial gaslighting and pathologizing of black femmes, which internally turns their argument about you are reverse racial gaslighting. The 2NC is a big presumption, FYI, which means you can strike it off your flow because they have not won an offensive argument in the block. We have made a uniqueness argument about the vow as redress is a contentious strategy and affirmation to allow opportunity for generative potential, which is the drop Hartman 22 evidence. The app is not redress from the system, but is an orientation of redressing the body and not repairing or refocusing on theory to justify distancing from black women in the room, which is the impact turn to their framework model. I will go there here. We have impact turn their competition theory argument about every debate must be an interrogation of black suffering. One, they have conceded that it holds black femmes to an impossible double standard. Their entire link argument is that performances of black affect or black suffering are bad, and then they have done the same thing and said that we should interrogate those things by just listing a bunch of black women that have been dead or resurrecting those women from archives, which literally is their link argument. It proves that they use competition and criminalizing black femmes' ballots to go hear their analytic of blackness, i.e. debate is inherently anti-black does not mean that you should vote for CSU, but rather lean into the act to refuse repair in the face of non-black femme audiences, i.e. we have internally turned their cruel optimism impact based on their own framework offense because they always stage interrogations under their model as accusations rather than conversations, which is uniqueness for why the permutation is good. You can extend it here. Permutation to each definitely solves all of their offense. You can group all of their arguments about severance at the top. None of them are offense because we have impact turned the premise of competition and that is extended in the one and R. It does not crowd out things like critical impact turns or the capacity for the debates, nor does it cause ab condo because you do not impact turn anything. You said that the app did not meet its burden of proof, which is our argument about how you weaponize conventions of debate in front of non-black femme audiences in order to justify why your model of interrogating anti-blackness is good, which is the argument for why they have performed their own link argument. Now I will go to they say the liquidation decide. We have impact turn there, over focus on white people above. It is about whiteness and not white people, which is what the evidence is speaking to. So if the app wins its theoretical justification for why staging those encounters is bad, then obviously this is not offense for them, and there is no perf-con argument or a reason to reject the team because we have one that we have not done that. Also, perms are not a reason to reject the team. This supercharges our argument about them weaponizing conventions of debate in order to crowd black femme generativity out, which means the only surrender ballot solves. Now I will go to the link debate proper here. The app says parasitism should not guide our politics, which turns their humanism argument. If it is true that white judges are parasitic, then they have performed to meet white people where they are and recreate the dichotomy of pleasure and pain or white repair. Them coming up with reasons of talking about the app or desires differently or key requires the app's framework of redress, i.e. an understanding of redress as a constant conversation in opposition to recourse to the body. They're distancing from that, or that analytic is bad and recreates the staging of encounters that everyone agrees is bad, but they link more to this argument because they have weaponized theory at black women's expense. And you can extend it here. They've conceded our argument about gender. Only the app gives a linguist to gender and black femmes' inevitable desires in opposition to their projection of collective desires that blackness cannot account for the particular ways in which black femmes perform or articulate their desires, but always weaponize and overdetermine the needs of black femme community, which means that they have recreated conflicting statements between theories of blackness becoming the justification for black femmes' expropriation or criminalization to force them to aspire to be more real or more pure, while they get to be intentionally vague, which is the internal link to their arguments about reproducing endless death. They have conceded a bunch of reasons why they make Black femmes killable in the face of audiences. The tune of being like, we want ontology debate means presumption is not a negative ballot because they have conceded that you should meet Black femmes where they are, which is your instruction to surrender. It's not about individual Black femmes, but rather an overarching unique discussion they have conceded in the block.
I think it's 9:13.
Yeah.
9:15 right now. I have these here in mind. My dock just froze. Hold on. Battery. Shit.
Oh, you see.
I'm at 240. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, 241 resuming. Are any independent reasons to reject the team?
No.
Yeah. I just want to make sure.
No.
That's that. Yes.
I have to. Can I move your charger down?
Yeah.
You're fine. You're fine. Hey, we're going with that. Are we figuring?
Oh, my bad.
How will long recharger show with that? And if that happens at all. Hello. It is a criticism, but cross applications will be they should be pretty clear when it happens.
It's just the guy.
But I'll be answering like the case obviously.
Oh, here, just give me a second.
Yeah, you're good. Okay, Daniel, Michael. Flynn, I know you're good, right? Okay, I'll start with that.
Winning anti-blackness is ontological and rooted in the ability to drive TKO is the case because we're winning a huge fungibility impact that turns out ways our offense, and we win the ways we desire for articulating violence through slavery to performance, redress, and the call for the ballot. The challenge anti-blackness within debate means that they reinvested back into institutions of legitimacy and academia that rely on economic activity and racial sexual exploitation. Drop that we are winning a league that turns the case. We do not win the alternative solve anti-blackness because they drop. We are critiquing that frame. In front of you can see that most of our offense and strategies are non-unique and status quo. Nothing about voting after parts of status quo means you can vote negative on substance since they cannot solve their offense, plain pressure, nor ontological and liberal drive to prove that we will attempting to engage in redress through telling the pain and captivity and anti-blackness. You should all vote negative to end the world because refusing the attempt for cruel optimism is try or die because anything else risks bringing back the abstract structures that trap strategies of resistance in civil society that make black people fall in love with civil society all over again through the framing of social life social dead. Now, framing issue. The 1 yard has dropped the 2 and T ballot link. No new argument. The impact turns their framing of meetings for black friends when they are and when it means to vote after surrender the ballot. You think the 2 yard will probably sound grand in the question, but the 1 yard dropped it. No take back to the outcome of 3 yard ballots. Do not change anti-blackness in debate. Drop. They may allow for black debaters to be more on team, but people are still empowered and white people still co-opt the after to celebrate institutions built upon slavery through the ideas of social resistance and with redefined intellect power structure. They drop that believing that you should just give them a 3-0 on the ballot, distract you from the idea of debate is an anti-black faith which seeks legitimacy from structures like debate that are ontologically anti-black to prove by their reading of the resolution of the YC. That means that this is not a question of the ballot to solve harm, rather it's you say fuck university and end the world. This is a TKO, it kills the case. You not take them back because the 2AC made a decision to say give me the ballot as a form of redress. We impact turn it only or drop their recruits. You should hold the line. Now ontology, we did not drop their gender card, but they dropped a great 2 and T card, which is Douglas evidence. They thought that our theory explained their often proved only on proving is often. They dropped we explained gender because black gender is encapsulated to the relation of libido drive that sexualizes black people. We proved they raised gentleness in the face of violence. That proves the Patsy Pat example, the overutilization of black fest is what allows for fungibility and gratuity to gain their culture theory. They dropped this is the example of how investing in libido drive of people who are black or non-black in the sexual desire of black feminism is what allows for them to co-opt their suffering and pain narrative through the 1AC in order to make violence more fungible, more palpable, and make them want to seek more black suffering in order to consume it over and over again. With proofs, we don't have a reason for why we solve. We prove we are not vague. We have a specific theory of power that proves the ability of economy. We do not make black femmes killable. They make black femmes killable through the ability of economy. It proves that presumption is a negative impact to the proof. They do not meet black femmes where they are, but rather they flip the unique discussion because we're winning that their method gets black women, feminine, black women more fungible. They say we link back to you wrong. We never said vote negative to redress violence. Rather, we said refuse the drive. They say interrogation is insufficient. We need to link back femmes they are. We are meeting black femmes they are by how we debate about methods. We are willing that link turns case. We wanted their attempt to be black femmes where they are great comparisons and consumption of black feminism. They say the ballot criminalizes people. Obviously not true. I have a link for this, so I'll answer it later. They say we weaponize appeals to criminalize black femmes. Obviously not true. They drop you're not criminalization of them, rather we're negating their method. This is a double turn with their arguments about how we need to engage the app because we did by saying their method was bad. Them saying that we were criminalizing them is the example of them saying that we are doing something negative to harm them, which is obviously a false equivocation and proves that they create more racial gaslighting because they tell black men that they are criminalizing them by saying their method is bad, which is definitely disproven by all their offense. It proves their gender potential and he proves the act cannot solve the body. Okay, extend the link properly. The 1 yard was very underappreciated. Reject 2 3 yard arguments. They dropped in the performance of wake work. Is what allows for prioritizing intellectual work that diminishes black radical thought by pacifying the resistance of books, speeches, etc., which is proven by how the app is not unique. They dropped the example of the UN movement, which was justified presumption and proves the link because it proves that the UN announced slavery was crime and nothing happened because they still assumed that slavery was not a crime because it was legal. They tried to prove that saying slavery is bad or violence against black people is bad does not change the opportunity of violence. They dropped this double turn and they dropped the double bind. Either A, black people already know slavery is bad and black people say a little piece before negative presumption, or they try to convince people that slavery is bad, which links to our affect link. I will extend it here. They dropped their everyday resistance futile. They dropped their methods are insufficient and this is black people into pro-optimism and redemption because they dropped that when the slowdown strikes happen, people get fired for not reducting them, people go hungry and die, and they drop that people go to these Saturday night parties and get shot up because they are still embedded into forms of everyday resistance that goes trades off the end of the world. Prove they create more anti-black violence. They dropped the access to the Palmer evidence that says that when you do this sort of politics of redress, this example of the economy where judges interpret candidate performance as irrational, etc., which it will allow them to see them as affective consumption. Prove they cannot solve. They say redress is a process. They dropped the process for optimism because it proves that there's no reason when the process ends, how we know it's working, how the way the cost of terror proves it's not bad. We're not criminalizing you. We're debating you, and drop that saying we're criminalizing you more often. They said we leave back from the room. One, you did as well because you called to defend the dead.
that secondly, we not use brown killer as an example to go after redress. Rather, we said that we proved the African idea. Also proved we don't proud of black feminists go because we said that building Africans by divides. To take fuck black people links back to politics. This is a new link to the proof they prefer recognition and politics as opposed to saying we should end the world, which is the alternative. And white people, but also if it's true that we fuck white people, links back, you should vote for each vote negative on presumption because they cannot solve their divides. They say that we are okay. Whiteness assume that non-black people cannot engage in the political economy. It proves that's not about white people. It's really okay. Framework. Our interpretation that this debate. Actually, really quickly, the permutation. I'll do it here. One, they drop. I'm going to go for substance. One, they dropped it's wrong because they also dropped that they dropped the permutation not solved because of a form of human parasitism and proves that their arguments are functionally wrong. They dropped that we were willing waiting for our methods incompatible for a link debate and proves they can never solve any of their offense because we were willing our methods are mutually exclusive. They call to do things like redress. We call to reject this thing. We have different levels on theory to prove they cannot solve any of their offense to prove that we're not functional. That prove they cannot solve their offense. Also drop competitive acceptance is wrong. Drop they do on -2, -2. So also drop theory is good because it provides way for people who create better space for engagement. We're proving not solve any of their offense. There's no risk of permutation because we are functionally incompatible on theory, and we're definitely willing that the alternative is better because instead of calling for a politics of redress, is a process of analogy, and we should engage in the attempt to end the world by rejecting their resolution focus. The other arguments they gave were for affect inevitable. They dropped that affect inevitable. Zero is the case. They may say that we don't have a strategy for black femme. We all we have to win is that the gain the aft is better because we are just winning an argument that proves that their investment in form of redress are bad argument consumption, and proving that that solves better because we all know that nothing really reform solve violence, but only we're willing to link that just out with the first case. Flynn hacks, how much prep y'all have? 3:30.
Oh, sorry, it kicked me out on.
I'll kick you out. Okay. With Brooklyn who's got kicked out of Zoom, so she's joining back.
Okay. One, 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, yeah.
Anybody not ready? You're voting affirmative for a politic of redress. Your ballot is an interruption of mutual circulation of encounters where you wish black women were, but not, but instead, where you wish black women were, but instead concerns the articulation of the needs and desires to meet them. A major framing issue is that both teams agree that the world is terrible, but what do we do then? The 1% resent their analytic distances themselves from black women because the world is anti-black, is auto-vote affirmative because that is the weaponization of the existence of pain to justify criminalizing black women's capacity to understand or orient towards pleasure. Only a politic of redress avoids racial gaslighting that forces the necessity of meeting black women where they are when we're winning, that there are inevitable moments of affect, which is uniqueness for why your ballot is an orientation towards the I got
You kicked out again? Yeah, I
I'm so
Uh,
sorry.
I know it's obviously not your fault. Brittany got kicked out again. My bad. Give her 1 minute.
Can I just use
I think we're gonna
can I
use
just
your
use Aegis computer?
yeah. We're just gonna use Amy's computer because
Right.
you probably just want to restart it with you.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna start over. Okay. You're voting affirmative for a politic of redress. Your ballot is an interruption of beaches, circulations of encounters where you wish black women were, but instead concerns the articulations of the needs and desires to meet them. A major framing issue is that both teams agree that the world is terrible, but what do we do then? 1% resent their analytic distances themselves from black women because the world is anti-black, is the auto-vote affirmative because that is the weaponization of the existence of pain to justify criminalizing black women's capacity to understand pleasure. Only a politic of redress avoids racial gaslighting that forces the necessity of meeting black women where they are when we're winning, that there are inevitable moments of affect, which is our uniqueness for why your ballot is an orientation towards the opportunity of ongoing conversations of how to interrogate our relationship to the body. Voting negative will immediately trigger our emotions, intimacies, impact for conversations with black women is constantly foreclosed because the world is anti-black. It makes it literally try or die for a politic of redress. This is why you are instructed to surrender to blackness. Both teams agree that anti-blackness permeates structures, but only surrender is a consensual bridge of entry that says that we should not hold black women culpable for wanting to articulate that understanding. It is a question of orientation, i.e. how do we meet black women where they are, which turns their offense because they trade off with the ability to strategize. There is a largely they trade off of that thing, and that we have a monstrous intimacy impact that is not uttered by the 2 hours so that I don't have to go. I do not have to. I can win this game by after going off this page. Go to the K. The panel needs to have a real moment that the alternative is strategically aloof and vague. This is our argument about staging encounters with possibility to distance yourself from the demands of black women that you come in contact with. They're winning a level of inevitability to their arguments about white judges and affect, which is our arguments about gender, the irrationality of blackness makes our demands, or how we articulate to affected as justification to or shift around black women or do that racial gaslighting. Only a politic of redress says that we should not foreclose the possibility of conversation or from their constant refusal, but instead allows possibility of iterations and potential through the permutation, which they dropped internal link. A uniqueness argument for why the ballot is definitely key. Winning this deficit frames their offense is sufficient to vote affirmative because we're winning. Bitches are tired now, and bitch literally offers us nothing besides saying we should self-abandon our strategies because they have not met the threshold of what the fuck do you do for black women? How do we orient towards black women in systems of anti-blackness? The archive and academy arguments is literally the drop double standard to set that turns out ways all of their offense. The lost resuscitation of the dead black women like Breonna Taylor and movements and gratuitous violence to then turn around and critique Kansas for bringing up violence for a panel proves that Beach's advocacy is overcommitted to competitive gains that bait and switch black women. The redress and articulate their needs in the face of the world. This is not falling in love with the civil society, but it denounces the idea that black women should be culpable for how civil society operates in the first place. That culpability, that means that they will never meet black women where they are. The threshold to what affirmative was never solved all of whatever, but rather orientation would solve their offense about the ballot. They are the only ones who circulate black suffering through continuous recitation of dead black people out there to remove responsibility and accountability from niggas in here, that they will always recuperate intercommunal and misogyny norm in the interim, which means that you literally make the fucking structure worse. There is definitely no double turn with the racial gaslighting argument. There is no double turn on gaslighting. It was not, you did not engage with the 1AC enough, but rather you said conflicting burdens about how we understand intercommunal processes like fucking deliberations or the archive, because you're able to resuscitate but also criminalize black women for maybe doing that same process. It means that this libidinal drive is not a warrant or reason why you should not vote affirmative. It is our argument about orientation, about how the structure means that you do not actually care about what the fuck you do for black women in the first place. They link harder because the authors not describe those moments, but rather interrogates them at the level of their relationship to the pain body without resuscitating empathetic encounters with individuals, which is the only way community building doesn't get precluded or recreate anti-black misogyny nor in the first place. There is definitely a large risk that their over-focus on competition is a reason why they will always reproduce misogyny on the interim, which is the only ballot as orientation to resolve that means that we are sequencing offense to their stuff. All the permutation answers are just like condo is bad and all these other investments in debate and calls for the ballot as they vote negative to sort of end the world proves that they think harder because they are the only ones that have set a limit on how black folk ought or ought not encounter audiences or make certain demands in the first place. A politic of redress resolves that risk that people identify parasitically when the 200 is entering none of the one-year land or embedded clash about how they're over-focused on competition or a reason why we don't get demands or permutation as justification for you do not have to meet black women where they are because they do not or will never meet our threshold. We have impact during this argument and said that their over-focus on whiteness is the fucking problem and a uniqueness argument to vote affirmative, which means that only voting negative will always recreate those monstrous intimacies, impact, and cycle that sort of recitation of their own offense. And rather, you should orient towards the affirmative and allow black women to articulate their needs while being able to have those conversations. Them having qualms with the 1AC is our argument that you will always foreclose the possibility to understand or meet black women where they are. This is your argument about like surrender and all the things, but there is no trade-off argument without risking more intercommunal violence in the first place. Their ballot arguments are all links back to themselves because that has to say, well, you were in debate and the world is anti-black. No shit, what do we do about it? Only a redress will solve that. Well, they probably hold black women culpable because they have said meeting black women where they are, i.e. what the fuck do you do for black women? That's why I do nothing, which I think the threshold to vote affirmative should be actually on the floor.
Good debate. Good debate. Good debate.
Shit. I think it's wrong.
Oh.
Yeah.
This one can sit.
I'll be back.
on there, turn right. That's a weird name.
Okay. I'll send you my 2 weeks.
No, I already got.
Oh, yeah, I'm ready for it.
Social management social, is that right?
It's the top one.
Oh,
It's gonna take them.
I thought you meant I was like, oh, no. Right. That's actually so funny. I can see it. Oh my god, did you hear that? Oh shoot. See, I did it again. Well, you didn't look, so. Whoa. Interesting.
Decision is in. Give me 60 seconds and I'll be right back.
Everybody can. Everybody can hear you, so you're good with that.
Okay, cool. Congrats to both teams. This was an excellent round. It is a 2-1 decision for the negative from Long Beach.
Yeah, I'll go first. I end up voting affirmative. I think there's sufficient risk that the ballot can function as an interruption of encounters, which allows Black women to articulate their needs and
Wait, can
desires.
someone turn on their volume?
Sorry. I just did that. My bad. That makes sense. Yeah. Let me know. Or Daniel, can you try to?
Hey, Flynn, can you hear me from over here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think that there's a sufficient risk the ballot functions as an interruption of encounters, which allows Black women to articulate their needs and desires from a position of where they are. I think that 2AR is correct that winning ontology isn't a TKO, because even if it's true that the world is anti-Black, which plays out in multiple instances, given my role of the judge, that doesn't answer the question of what do we do for Black women. So voting neg would mean that I would trigger out the foreclosing of these conversations regarding Black women's desires, which would mean surrender would become a consensual bridge of entry that doesn't hold Black women accountable for how they enter the conversation. The ontology debate, I think the 1AR 2AR analysis that the ballot has some form of generative potential to resolve portion of the ontology debate by affirming moments of redress in an anti-Black world sufficiently answers the uniqueness question, because even if it's true that the world is anti-Black, the debate has been reframed towards this procedural question that I did above through the role of the judge of like, what do we do for Black women? So like, even if you're winning a social death claim, social death doesn't mean that I foreclose all moments of redress in anti-Black institutions. So I think that ultimately, I think that the ontology debate and link debate are kind of connected here, because I think that because the articulation of the link debate and the 2R is ultimately linked to the ballot, and I think the ballot could be potentially regenerative, as I did above. I'm not really sure how that answers like that would give the link, which would prescribe the ontology debate, because I'm not sure that would reinscribe legitimacy to power structures, which would allow those power structures to reshape anti-Blackness. So ultimately, I think that I can vote affirmative absent like a clear articulation of what the alternative would be able to do to be able to resolve those link debates. So I'm sufficiently convinced then that the app gets a permutation which would resolve the links, because while I do think that like the perm defense was pretty good in the perm turn, I also think there's not a sufficient response in the 2NR that the politic of redress would be able to resolve the parasitism argument, because of like it's a reason that they'll be held culpable for the violence of the white people in the room that they didn't cause, which I don't think is something I can hold against the perm. So I kind of resolved the links there.
All right, Flynn, I can go?
They say you can go. Yeah.
All right, cool. If I were to redo the 1AR, 2AR, I started writing out everything because I realized that I ramble, so I'm just going to read it to you, okay? I start at the top with answering the strategies versus analytic framing they're making about what this debate is about. I think an easy way to hedge back would be to indicate that the idea of saying what we need analytic to explain the gratuitous attachments of Black flesh when niggas don't need to analyze shit because it can be felt through non-commutable means because of the inevitability of affect proves the distorted practices of how you never think about the nuanced relationalities of Black femmes as they exist and grapple with the moments when the body has to be felt through the intensifying lived realities of the plain pleasure dichotomy. I think this bolsters the argument of you never meet Black femmes where they are up and allows you to have at least contextualization of how their particular analytic does this in debate, when then one, continually calling the strategy individualist to criminalize Brooklyn's ability to grapple with the loss that is required in the here and deal with the intimate relations that exist within this space. Two, the call and invoking of other Black femmes to make coherent of their analytic turns this ability because it shows the logic you're making in cross sets, at least what I'm getting, is not about what Black women can do for you, but what you can do for them. And this is an example of how they co-opt these narratives to create an analytic of the dead that folds them back into the archival process to force Black femmes to labor for your analytic that doesn't lead to anything. One of the things I think that will be helpful, Kansas, is kind of explain to me what it means to meet Black femmes where they are as it relates to debate. I think in a world where you have some indicts on like their run to theory, their lack of praxis, and the criminalization arguments are good, I think you should make more of a framing analysis here of what it means for the round and how I should prioritize things on the flow. Do I just give y'all the ballot? Do I do more work to connect the arguments? And also, what do I do as the only nigga on this panel? Which I think was in the 2AC, but it was gone after that. I think at best you assert the need to show up for Black femmes, but you don't tell me how to show up for Black femmes and what that means continually throughout this debate. which is why I think leaning into the Hartman analysis of situating performances within everyday practices and thinking about possibilities of practice in relation to domination would have did y'all so much justice here, because I think it aligns to the theory versus praxis debate a little bit perfectly. So I can think about that in relation to the framework debate too on the K-flow. Additionally, I think the negatives ahead on the theory debate, and I think you all need to lean more into Hartman's analysis, above, analysis of continual process that allows bodies to think about contrasts of labor, pleasure, pain dichotomies that are necessary, to think about the reconstitution of allowing the meeting of these unmet yearnings that she indicates, especially because I think you are essentially making a paraontics argument. But I think we need to do more than just indicate. It's about what we do and indicate. It's about what we do, how we do it, and how we can deploy these strategies to refashion those discursive purposes of the body. At best, these examples were early on, i.e. in the first cross-examination where y'all talk about work slowdowns, etc. And I think the 1AR and 2AR concession of the Douglas evidence is kind of damning here, because this is more of an uphill battle on the theory debate, because the 2NR was actually really good on going for this, because I now agree that the engendering of blackness makes human genders possible and continues the hold of the ontological captivity of blackness, which I think undercuts some of the offense, i.e. the criminalization arguments that is heavily framed in the 2AR, because your theorization and understanding of these sexualized violence reifies producing more relational differences when black gender is still captive to the relation. Therefore, it turns all your offense, because redress is the libidinal drive that reifies humanist notions that we all agree that we should disavow. Even if I move from the theory of power debate and I go more onto the link analysis, for CSU, I get the wake work link as presumption. I do think that we could have done this less of a link articulation and maybe used it more as an ontological framing, maybe possibly. I think the better link was the affect stuff and the redress analysis. I think a really good 2AR spin honestly could have just gone for affect is inevitable and continually highlighting examples of this throughout the debate, especially in those cross-examinations that you're trying to do earlier. Showcases that the neg is also complacent in these structures and their engagement within those moment of affectual concepts, which even if there is a risk of a link, they do it too. And you should defer, and I should just defer to y'all, and that will be an example of doing work for y'all. I think CSU, you all should make the argument that even if it is inevitable, that proves why we should continually try to divest from it and explain why seeing affect and conceiving affect as interchangeable is exactly what you're critiquing. And that's why an interrogation to end it all is a better way to escape that. Two, I think this slowdown example is not handled in the 1AR or the 2AR at all. They've made an indictment to some of the things your evidence is saying that you do, i.e. the stuff that I said above, and how that method is insufficient because then folks lose jobs, become a house, and they're facing more perpetual violence, which is a turn to the aft, at least, when I think about your strategies. The third thing is the ballot recognition stuff. I don't think the ballot recognition doesn't change the analytic or the systems of anti-blackness, and you have a call and burden to resolve the harms you isolate. I think we need to hedge back against this. Because the 2AR kind of drops this a bit, although you're not relying on the white judges argument, which I'm getting in the 2AR. I think you need to hamper on the ballot is not doing the work, as recognition, but to alleviate some of the harms and meet black women where they are, like you're indicating. I don't buy the permutation. The 1AR did drop the human parasitism disad. I do think that the 2NR should do more explaining on the Grimes evidence for this to talk about how they utilize the labor of black people in our blackface. I think Brooklyn, you should probably light them up on this metaphor and also think about some of the arcs that could be made to how to evaluate this when they also use black femmes' death, i.e. like Breonna Taylor. I do think the 2NR was a bit too much and could also trim down in certain places, which does make it a little bit tougher to kind of contextualize some of this stuff that's going on. I think a better 2NR would have just been the slowdown example, affect link, the all articulation, and then framing. So, especially because I do agree with the 2AR that the alt is a little bit aloof, but I give you some of the leeway because I don't get that much in the 1AR. So I give the 2NR a bit of grace on the alt articulation. So TLDR, I think that we should refuse libidinal drives that regurgitate anti-blackness practices that are also parasitic for black femmes. Therefore, I move toward trying to end it all is better.
Can I ask the question because I'll forget when
Yeah.
this RFP starts going? It definitely could have been packaged better, but like the stuff where like you wish that there was an argument about they link back to with like you reanimate or like re-articulate like Breonna Taylor's murder or things like that to a panel. That was definitely in the 2AR. I guess like can that like did you not like was it not like packaged offensively for you or hearing it? And if it was, like why is that not uniqueness for like the ballot? Because at least that's what I thought the 2AR was.
I think the way that is framed in the 2AR, at least how I'm getting it, is like a concept of just saying like utilizing these examples is an example of how you kind of take from these particular labors, but it's not contextualizing it at least to how the analytic and the framing from the 2NR is like, this is just an example to explain the ontological realities of how it exists. It is not a taking of these particular moments to like utilize their depth and engage them back into our archival processes.
Wait, can you explain the latter again? You see it as we're explaining example. Can you explain it again?
I see it as an example contextualization to then talk about the ways in which the differences and the nuances kind of exist to conceptualize different examples as it relates to the ontology debate. So then,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. What's your question?
You didn't see it as their link is about recirculating or whatever, like pain and suffering for ballot. They have also done that. That means that there's double standard or risk that like interim balance occurs. Like that's like an example of like anti-black misogyny.
I don't think that maybe I possibly got it that way because I don't think it was as offensive there, especially because I do think that at least in the 2NR, some of the analysis there at least it proves that your ideas are bad and it proves their theory, and because yours more is so about a process of recognition versus them is just trying to use it as an analytic because it's not about coming to a resolution. Yours is, right? And that redress is now just an attempt to kind of utilize those examples as to be like, well, we can resolve some of these things versus them saying that it's not about the process of trying to resolve these things, but just trying to show how it showcases the analytic. So more so, it's not more so. What I'm trying to say is they have made it perpetually about like you are trying to come to a solution about these things when they're like there is no solution. So the contextualization or the utilization of the example is just proving the analytic, but it's not proving or it doesn't side with you and the ability to overcome the violences that occur, or at least anti-blackness in this case.
You're good, Flynn.
Okay, sounds good. I agree with everything Michael said. I think a couple things at the top. I think more evidence comparison from both teams would have been exceedingly helpful, explicitly indicting the other team's app. From the app, I think what would have resulted in me voting app is just like a better explanation of the perm. Like walk me through like what the world would look like if we did each, or like what debate would look like, and why that would resolve their link argument. So like quote their link evidence and be like, this line is an example of the permutation, or at least be like, the best line from this evidence says blah, 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 blah. That does not apply to the permutation. You know, all of their evidence assumes like the app alone, not the combination. And then I think then explain the app as like a net benefit to the permutation and like compare the impact of the app to that of the K. And like that being like the top structuring of the 2AR would be helpful for me. I think the secondary thing is like, maybe this performance stuff goes even before the perm, but like what was missing for me is a little bit more judge instruction here. So like, you should like go for and at the top of the 2AR, make a big, huge focus, the arguments about their performance. Like frame it as a top level concern that comes before substance, that their performance turns the content of their evidence, even if they're substantively ahead on it, which means that like they don't solve the app nor do they turn it. And means that like even if they win ontology, that's irrelevant. And like this is what it would mean to align with Black women. But like decision proper, I'm gonna try not to like repeat too much what has already been said. But yeah, I vote NAG. I think the NAG is winning the ontology debate, but almost more importantly, that they have a better theory of gender in relation to anti-blackness as a function of the conceded Douglas evidence. So the K outweighs in terms of the case. You know, that the NAG has explained the Douglas evidence as meaning the NAG is meeting Black femmes where they are via a debate about the method. I think the NAG is winning via their like libidinal economy / theory stuff. That redress is moral optimism that traps Black folks in civil society and social death, which outweighs in turns fungibility. The kind of like the link stuff. The Douglas stuff I think was already talked about. I'm not going to explain it again. I think Michael did a good job about this. I think that the result of that is it means that like your theory and process is inaccurate and like can't result in a like solution, which is maybe not the correct word, but yeah. The other like link argument that I found to be really persuasive was this like the link to like kind of weight work is what it's tagged, but it's this Bickerstaff evidence that I think is really good. But it's just like the act is cruel optimism, the kind of everyday resistance trades off with, you know, ending the world and fighting anti-blackness more broadly. It's like a performative justification of pain and violence. It's something that results in spirit murder, and that this like utility of everyday resistance is bad, results in things like, I don't know, white supremacists shooting up the party, and more violence. The permutation debate proper, the Grimes evidence, I think, is just like not answer the parasitism evidence. Just that like blackness takes whatever shape non-black people assign it, like suffering kind of serves the ends of, you know, non-black political movements, and that the act is a rhetorical move that takes Black folks' suffering and allows it to be co-opted and more fungible, ultimately, you know, rendering demands for redress like ineffective and like, quote from their evidence, like less coherent in a world of like anti-blackness. I also think that like the app could just do a little bit better job, like just answering some of the ticky-tacky arguments on the perm, just like, I don't know, the neck being like, it's mutually exclusive, the alt is incompatible with redress. Like, I think that the app just needs to explain like why it is compatible. So like, for the app, an example of like what I was saying in quoting their evidence is like this Bickerstaff evidence, that's the weight work link that I was just going on about, like, oh, it's really good. The last line of that evidence, like the last sentence, is perm solvency, which like, yeah, as an example of like how evidence comparison would have probably like shifted or could have shifted my decision. But yeah, I don't want to repeat a bunch of other stuff. That is stuff.
I don't think I have any questions.
Okay. Everything, Michael, you said about two-nard construction makes sense. So like, I assume like ontology at the top, and then the link stuff is like slowed down affect. I guess like the question is like, do you think, like in order-wise, do you think framework should come first, or what do you think in that?
Yeah, because the framing helps with the ontology base. So I would probably put the framing first, and then ontology base.
Okay. The framework, ontology, and then like the link, and then all permutation stuff.
Precisely.
Okay. I think 1NT construction was good. My last question is just like block stuff. Is there anything you think we could have slowed down, or not slowed down, maybe just like, is there anything that you think should have changed from the block that I guess did not happen in this debate?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that you're doing on the K portion of today is also very similar to some of the K stuff that's going on.
I'm sorry, say it again. I didn't hear you.
A lot of the stuff that you're doing on the K, especially with the lead stuff, is kind of very similar to the K stuff with presumption. I think that maybe just repackaging and just going for more minimal links, I guess would probably be better in this case.
Yeah.
Make sure you just leave presumption for the long time.
Okay.
So then it gives you that more time so that you can take the presentation stuff to the bar.
And then I think this probably answers Flynn's concern about like the weight work stuff being like too presumption-y, like probably just like phrasing it more offensively, and then I guess leaving the perm, or not perm, the presumption stuff in the webinar. Flynn, do you think that's sufficient? Okay, that makes sense. More weight work, leave webinar for presumption. Okay, I think that's all of our questions. Thank you all, I appreciate it. Bye, Flynn, your food looks good.
It is not, it's a pretty simple microwave meal. But yeah, have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you, bye.